In this week's episode, I'm joined by Wendy Ryan, she, her, CEO of Kadabra, author of the award-winning bestseller, Learn, Lead, Lift, How to Think, Act, and Inspire Your Way to Greatness. And she's an executive producer and cast member in the groundbreaking feature-length film, Show Her the Money. This week, our conversation is about a unique cure for travel anxiety, period leave progress in Odisha, a Staten Island Parade with a little more pride, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, Bernadette. I'm so happy to be here. I think you gave me a great intro, but I'll just say that, I call Silicon Valley home. So I'm sort of in the epicenter of where we think a lot about the future. We think a lot about how do we get people from all over the world to work together. And I started my career in human resources, came up into leadership development as really where my passion kept leading me. And today I combine that leadership development and that HR lens with investing also and advocacy for women-led companies in particular who are trying to get access to capital and find that it's an uphill battle.
It is an uphill battle. So can you talk a little bit about the film?
Sure. Well, Show Her the Money was really the brainchild of Catherine Gray, who is an amazing advocate and has her own, show. She invests in her and heads She Angel Investors. But she really was flummoxed by this idea that women-led companies are only getting 2% of all venture capital funding. And that number has not moved for like the last 15, 20 years very much. And most people don't know that. So she reached out to folks like me and other people that she met and said, hey, I have this film. Would you be interested in helping us get it off the ground? And I said, sure. As soon as I heard about the topic and having kind of walked in the shoes of being a woman entrepreneur, of being an investor and meeting a lot of other women entrepreneurs, I said, absolutely. We need to educate. We need to help people understand how this issue is actually a huge drag on our economy. So whether or not you sort of identify as a feminist or someone who's really wants to level the playing field from a DEI perspective,
Sure.
this is actually a hard business issue. And it's one that we know that if we were to have parity just in venture capital funding, it would increase our national GDP by somewhere in the order of $4.5 trillion a year. So this is a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, investing in women has such a profound ripple effect on any economy, whether it's micro investments in developing countries or venture capital here in the U.S. and
That's
and
right.
so it really does make a big difference. And I don't think we've been talking about that. So thank you for being part of that film, and folks, make sure you check that out. So in this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote a little bit about the dehumanizing that has happened this election season, and specifically about how transgender folks have been dehumanized in ads, used as political pawns. And it's sad. It's heartbreaking. I know my friends have been really impacted by this, and it doesn't feel good. And when we dehumanize folks, it's sort of the worst form of I don't even know. I'm losing words because it
Yeah,
is
it's
so
so distressing,
devastating. Yeah,
really.
it's so disgusting. And so I shared, and I've been sharing on LinkedIn, some interviews, people who've been on this show, trans folks who've been on this show, just to raise awareness about what they're doing professionally, personally. We don't always just talk about the content on the show. Sometimes I hear about people's lives, right? And so I wanted to bring, to amplify those voices. But I also wanted to talk to you about humanizing folks. And I know your book
Yeah.
is called Learn, Lead, Lift. And this time I think we've gotten ourselves very, very polarized. And I would love to hear about how to use the Learn, Lead, Lift model to humanize folks on your team.
Mm. I love this challenge, and this is such a juicy and rich question. But I think that when we talk about humanization and dehumanization, we have to acknowledge that there are lots of dimensions to that, right?
Sure.
And so the Learn, Lead, Live framework was really designed to speak to what is future ready leadership,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does it look like in a leadership context? And I think humanization is absolutely a theme and integrated in that. In saying that, I just want to acknowledge that, there are other spaces and contexts in which you might say, well, maybe there's something else that's needed, and that's okay too. In the context of leadership, Learn, Lead, Lift informs a couple of things. One, it acknowledges that leadership, and if we want to think about it in terms of leadership that's going to be future ready, it's made up of three things. It's made up of our mindsets, which is how we think. It's made up of our skill sets, which is what we know or know how to do, and
Mm-hmm.
also our behaviors, which is how we show up to others. You
Mm-hmm.
can think about it as your personal brand or what you're known for as a leader. And those three things interact together to create what people experience as leadership. And one of the things that we found in doing the research for the Learn, Lead, Lift framework is that there's a specific outcome or output of those three elements that is really important. And it's pretty universal in terms of if other people were to look at us and say, well, is Bernadette a great leader? Or is this person, this politician over here, a great leader? One of the things that people often will say in so many words is that they want leaders to be inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
equity minded, authentic, and trauma informed.
Mm.
And we've never really talked about, especially that T word, the trauma
Mm-hmm.
informed in leadership before. But when you think about it, that really is kind of the ultimate ethos around we need to humanize people, because
Absolutely.
when you're trauma informed in leadership, what it means is that you're not being a therapist, you're not trying to, solve everyone's problems, but you're just recognizing that people absolutely bring their problems to work with them. It's not like you
Mm-hmm.
can detach and if you're struggling at home, if your partner is struggling, if your kids are struggling with something, you don't just forget about that.
Yeah.
And so how do we create spaces as leaders that people feel safe in, so they
Yeah.
feel psychologically safe, and they also feel like they don't have to hide, right? That this
Mm-hmm.
stuff's going on at home. Because actually, when we give people a little bit of space to say, yeah, things are tough right now, they are able to focus and direct their energy into more productive things. So rather than telling people there's a hard line between, life and work and leave all your messy stuff at home, the Learn, Lead, Lift framework really gives leaders the mindsets, skill sets, and behaviors they're required to say, how do you create that environment where people can, be themselves, operate optimally, and be productive? And we know how to do that. We know what those ingredients are. We just need to support each other in actually doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And one thing I just want to add quickly is I think that it helps when leaders humanize themselves in order to then invite others to be a little bit more human and a little bit more authentic
Yeah,
as
that's that
well.
authenticity piece. And
Yeah.
when we talk about authenticity in leadership, sometimes people confuse authenticity with self-expression. So
Mm.
they think,
Yep.
okay, great. Wendy Ryan says I should show up as authentic. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go to work in my pajamas. I'm not
Right.
going to brush my teeth. Like, this is my authentic self. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about,
Exactly.
yeah, we're
Exactly.
talking about still being appropriate, looking at the norms of your organization or your context. But we're talking about meeting people where they're at and not trying to, again, pretend that you're perfect.
Yeah.
Don't pretend
Exactly.
you're perfect, because people, we know you're not.
Yeah. Well, I want to just take it a little bit further in terms of humanizing and just shout out the 5 folks who I highlighted in my LinkedIn post, and I'm going to highlight in the show notes the trans people who have been on the show before. So shout out to Gara Goldstein, Rex Wild, Celia Daniels, Irma Ashara, and Erica Vogel. So check out those interviews in the show notes, or watch them on YouTube, just to get some more humanity, hear some more stories. And let's now move into this week's Good Vibes. All right, the first story this week comes from Staten Island. For the first time in 60 years, Staten Island's St. Patrick's Day Parade will welcome LGBTQ plus folks under their own banner. So the new leader ended the parade's decades-long exclusionary policy. Woo! So the Pride Center of Staten Island will finally march. Wow, I can't believe these things are still happening.
I know, this one kind of blows my mind. I mean, people will ask me, my last name is Ryan, and
Mm-hmm.
just from the way that I look, people will say, "Oh, well, you must be Irish." And yes, I am actually, according to Ancestor DNA, I'm like a third, Irish. So
Mm-hmm.
it all fits. But kind of being raised in that Irish Catholic ethos, I was shocked by this, honestly, that this was actually happening in 2024.
I mean, Staten Island
And
is New York City. Let's not forget.
yeah, yeah, it was kind of, I was really surprised.
Well, there's always at least one story each week, Wendy, that's like, finally, finally, or all
Yeah,
of them.
yes, yes,
Right?
yes. Yeah, people are here whether we want to see them or not. So why don't we just see them? Like,
Yes,
that's at the most basic level. I just don't get that. I don't get making people invisible, like how that serves anybody well.
I agree. And I say that as someone who was, my parents were born in Ireland. I'm gay, so I have a lot of Irish pride. I have a lot of gay pride. And, I don't have any interest in marching Staten Island Pride, but I'm glad to know that it is now an option.
Absolutely.
All right. The second story this week is about darts. Noah Lynn Van Leuven became the first out transgender competitor in the Grand Slam of Darts, a milestone for inclusion in professional sports. She is ranked 5th globally among women dart players. And there were some boos from the crowd and criticism
Mm.
from some players, but she competed along legends who were very supportive of her. So amazing.
That's the best part of that story, is just that, and I think it shows the importance, and I'll tie this back to leadership of, we have to be the change we want to see. And if we're someone who's at the top of our game in any field, recognizing that what we say and showing up as allies is really impactful, and it's necessary. We can't, those top ranked players could choose not to say those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that would be a failure in leadership. So I'm so pleased that they, endorsed her and are providing that that support that's so deserved.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Van Gerwen, dart legend, said, "She plays terrific darts. Let her play." Right?
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. All right, the third story this week comes from the Portland International Airport, where Benny the Llama and Captain Jack the Alpaca are redefining stress relief. Part of an innovative animal therapy program, these gentle ambassadors bring joy to travelers with their soft fur, sweet faces, and even carrot kisses. Now, evidence suggests that therapy animals can ease anxiety, and seeing these special creatures in action at the airport is good for travelers.
I love that. It makes me want to fly to Portland just to meet them.
Right? A
Yeah.
random story, but it's so much fun.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed in my kids' high school, they're all now kind of a little bit older, so past this, but they would bring in therapy dogs on
Oh,
site during finals week. And I thought, what a
mm,
great idea. It's just uh, animals have a lot to teach us about being present, being in
mm-hmm,
the moment, being compassionate.
mm-hmm.
So I love that that's going outside of the classroom and into things like airports.
I mean, a little alpaca hug, a little hug with my dog Roy. You get a little oxytocin.
Absolutely. And
You
that's good
know,
for us.
good for us.
Whether
It's great for us.
however we
Yeah.
identify, it's really good for us.
Exactly. All right. The fourth story this week is from India, where Odisha, an Indian state, introduced a 1 day paid menstrual leave policy for women in government and private sectors, joining a couple of other states in India with similar measures and very rare around the world. So it allows women to take leave on their first or second day of their cycle. It's such a
This one
huge
like blew me
problem.
away. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I almost fell off my chair. I was like, where has this been all my life? As someone
Mm-hmm.
who really struggled with very painful periods for most of my life, it was like, how amazing would it have been to just have kind of the permission and the recognition that maybe you get to work from home those 2 days, or
Yeah.
maybe take that day off, and how
Mm-hmm.
much more productive can we be when we are able to practice self-care and not feel that we're letting somebody else down when we do that.
That's right. And the stigma that's attached to a regular monthly concern for women and some non-binary and trans folks as well. Let's be honest. That there's a lot of stigma around it, and there shouldn't be.
No,
And when it's in policy, it takes away some of the stigma.
it does. And it's over half our population has a uterus and is going to experience this.
That's
So
exactly right.
again, it makes sense. Let's do things that for half our population are supportive and help us show up as our best selves at work.
Exactly, exactly. Well, the last story this week comes from the state of New York, where voters approved Proposal 1, an equal rights amendment expanding anti discrimination protections in the state constitution. So, this is in anticipation of potential inclusion retractions and regressions. So, now these expanded policies safeguard against discrimination based on ethnicity, gender identity, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care, among others. It also protects trans rights and gender expression. So, nice to see a little bit of a proactive approach towards anti discrimination out of New York.
For sure. And I think a lot of people don't realize that for many decades, there has been an effort in our country, in the US nationally, to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, the equivalent of what they've passed in New York. And
Mm-hmm.
those efforts haven't been successful.
That's
And
right.
I think that what we can see in a lot of places and spaces that there are consequences for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pleased that that momentum and that action, to your point, is there in New York. And I hope that other states follow suit. And I hope that nationally that can also happen at some point.
Well, probably won't happen for at least another 4 years, but when it does, I'm sure you'll hear
I'm
about it
looking
in
long
good
term,
vibes.
Bernadette. I got my eye on the long term horizon. Yeah,
That's right. It will be a future 5 thing story. I'm manifesting it right now.
me too. Me
All
too.
right. Well, that's it for this week's 5 things stories. Now we move into good vibes to go. I have a good vibe to go. I'm going to share that, and then Wendy, I will
Great.
invite you to share your good vibe to go. So this is today is Monday, November 18th. On Wednesday, attend Rex Wild. So one of the trans folks that I mentioned earlier. Attend Rex Wild's next virtual gathering space for DEI, HR, and ERG leaders to discuss all things TGX plus, so transgender and gender expression plus. So I'll put that link in the show notes so you can hopefully attend that event. Wendy, how about your good vibe to go?
Yeah, well, so glad that Rex is creating that space and holding that space for folks. So thank you.
Exactly.
Um, my good vibe to go is really kind of just a piece of advice, and it's one that
Mm,
I've been giving to myself, honestly, but also clients and folks in my network. But it's really that when we feel like, the tide is maybe not going in our favor, right? It's
mm-hmm.
not supporting our work the way we want it to. We don't feel like the context in which we're operating is as friendly and supportive as we would like. I think that's a really good time for us to not get stuck there. It's easy to sort of wish that those things were different, even if they're not in our immediate control. So instead, I think an approach that's really good for us, it's really empowering, is to say, what is one thing I can do today to move myself closer to what I want?
Mm,
So, what is the one action you can take, whether it's sending one person an email saying, hey, I see you. That was a great job. Let's talk about how we can collaborate. Or is it, I am going to go to that yoga class today because I need to regulate my nervous system. And this is
yep.
part of moving me toward that. So, just focusing, instead of getting kind of caught in what seems like an impossible task, focus on what's one thing you can do to move yourself closer, because we know that when we're in action,
Mm,
we feel better than
yep.
when we are stuck and inactive.
Yeah, we're fueled by momentum. It's like I think it's like
Yeah.
the law, one of the laws of physics. I think it applies here as well about, inertia, right? So makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Thanks, Wendy. So, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah. Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's my platform of choice these days.
Hmm.
And our website is wearekadabra.com. That's a great place to find out more about what we're doing with the Learn, Lead, Lift framework. And yeah, would love to keep the conversation going with you and your listeners.
Thanks, Wendy. Folks, we'll make sure that gets put in the show notes. Wendy, it has been such a treat having you on the show. I hope that you have a wonderful week. And folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.